You're listening to The Audit, presented by IT Audit Labs. Welcome to The Audit. My name's Eric Brown, and joining me today is Kyle Rosendahl, Nick Mellum, and James Arndt. James is our guest today as we're going to tell some tales from the trenches. Hey, James.
Hello. Thanks for this opportunity.
Absolutely. So, day in the life of James, what is that like? What do you do professionally?
I am a cyber threat intelligence analyst, and so we get big feeds of malicious emails and malware coming in, and we analyze that and send that out to our customers so that they can use that to check their own environments for legit known bad things. So we've got a variety of roles that we are rotating through, and it's been a slow week kind of this week. So I've been messing around with a lot of .NET malware, doing some research on that. It's pretty interesting.
What's some of the things that you've seen?
Well, it's .NET malware is really quite interesting in that it is accessible to just about anyone. You only need a couple tools like a DN spy, IL spy. You just load it up in there and you can see all of the code just right there in front of you. It's not like you're digging down into, binary or some obscure assembly language or anything like that. It's all just written in C#, and you can easily just follow the code around. And if I can do it, I think anybody can do it, really. But yeah, there's a couple of families that are all mainly written in .NET, like Agent Tesla keylogger, Snake keylogger, occasionally Formbook is also. And so when you can get past that initial first stage and get into the second stage where all of the different variables and things, it's C2 channels, it's email addresses, it's sending information out to. Once you get to there, then it all is just laid out right in front of you. You can really see the internals and how it works. It's really quite fascinating.
What have you seen recently as far as what are they going after?
Well, it really kind of depends on the malware family. When it comes to like Agent Tesla or Snake keyloggers, they're really just embedding themselves on the endpoint and then just, being a keylogger. That is monitoring all of your keystrokes, grabbing them all and sending them off to whoever is listening on the other end. Snake keylogger is also quite modular in that it can also run through all of the installed programs on your endpoints and start trying to grab saved usernames and passwords inside them. It's like sucking all those together and then sending them off to the bad guy too. So grabbing passwords, key logging, screenshots even, and all information about the endpoint too. So whatever it is that the bad guy is going to try to get, he'll try to do it.
Wow. And how are these getting onto the end user's workstation?
Through fish, as always.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, it is not overly difficult for an attacker to sneak malware or sneak a malicious attachment in an email through all of the security devices that are on your network and get it to a person's inbox.
And then when they click the link.
Yep. They open up the HTML attachment and they click the link. And sometimes when you open the HTML attachment, you click the link. The actual first stage is embedded directly in the HTML document itself. And so that looks like you just downloaded something. You open it up and hey, what do you know? It's a malicious executable. Other times, you click the link, then it downloads something. Most often, though, you click the link in a malicious email or attachment. It brings you to another web page and then asks you to download the thing. That's how they're bypassing. It's not necessarily the case that the malicious thing, the stage one, is always inside the email itself.
So it used to be that you could prevent users from having local admin on their machines so that they couldn't install these executables, and you'd have ways to detect C2 callouts or command and control callouts on your network. Are you seeing ways now that the threat actors are able to bypass these things?
A lot of them, it doesn't require administrative rights to run them in user space. I mean, at my old company, we'd have to play whack-a-mole because people were installing a browser that we didn't want them to. Well, they didn't need admin rights to install them locally as a user. Well, malware can work the exact same way also. When it comes to C2 information, yeah, if you know about it, if your whatever network security devices you have, if they know about it, then they can detect it. But man, if you don't know it, it's not always the case that it's going to be found.
Yeah. So when these are getting installed, so I mean, one of the things, how effective do you find like new endpoint protection programs to be, right? I think a lot of people use something like CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, Symantec is out there, right? I mean, they all have these new EDR platforms for endpoint protection. How well are these guys getting around those protections to get their code executing on the boxes? And what are some of those strategies that they're using to kind of bypass those EDR detections?
I really don't live in that aspect of malware analysis and just testing out different EDR tools. What I do know is that depending on the EDR, they'll be looking at different behaviors as to, hey, where did this actually get installed from? Where did this get executed from? Somewhere in downloads? Okay, maybe that should raise an alert. Is this DLL that's being loaded up, is it signed or not? And then whom is it signed by? So there are different ways that they can try to detect all of this stuff. For a while, everybody was hating on, using signatures and antivirus products and stuff. But, there, there's a lot of them, but they're fast and they're good at detecting yesterday's stuff. The new hotness now is always how quickly can we figure out, and find today's stuff. And that's how you get all of these different sorts of behavioral analysis and behavioral analytics promises that EDR vendors are selling. So yeah, that was at my old job. I lived in that quite a bit. As far as nowadays, man, if there was something that attackers were doing and it wasn't working anymore, they'd find a new way to do it. So the what's the quote from Jurassic Park? Life will find a way. Well, so will threat actors.
So it's interesting that you talk about the phishing, and I think we've all seen this. We all know it. We all talk about it, that phishing is the number one threat vector for our end users to be attacked. And I saw one over the summer that just reminded me how ingenious these threat actors are and can be, and why we need to continually educate and remind our users the importance of really paying attention to the emails. It's not just emails that have links in them. The one that I was involved with involved the company that I was working with, and then their third party rental broker, property manager. So the company I was working with had a few rental properties, somewhere around $16,000 a month in rent was due to one of their property management entities, that they rent from through this property manager. And that property management company had suffered a breach previously, maybe a month or so before, and had not told their customers of this breach. So the property management company was breached. One of their employee accounts was taken over, and they set up, they reviewed the all of the emails that were in that person's account, learned about their customers, and started crafting email rules that would send emails off site to another email address that the threat actor controlled. So when the property management customer sent an email in, that email would be rerouted to the threat actor's mailbox, and they could curate and learn about their intended targets, which were the property management company's customers. So in this particular instance, the threat actor crafted an email on behalf of the person's account that they had compromised. And at this time, the person doesn't know that their account's been compromised. And they send that email, targeted email to that customer who happened to be the company that I was working with. And the email was structured where it was enticing in that the email said, we are changing our ACH information, and we want to offer you a discount of 5% if you prepay your rent through the end of the year. So $16,000 a month times 6, somewhere close to $100,000 in rent. They get a discount of 5% on that if they paid by the end of June. And maybe there's 5 days or so left in the month of June at this point in time. So the person at the company I was working with then sends back, well, you need to fill out this information change request, which was a form where they put down the new ACH routing information and contact information, as the policy was that you call to verify any bank routing change instructions. But this is where things got a little bit convoluted, and they received back the form, and then that form needed to go to a different department, and that department would do the verification. Well, the threat actor added that undue pressure of it's getting close to the end of the month. We need these routing instructions changed in order to take advantage of that discount. With that time pressure and the not following the administrative controls that were in place, those routing, the ACH information was changed, payment was sent, and the person that thought they were doing a good thing for the company did that, had it done, sent it off to finance and said, this information needs to be changed. Finance changes it, executes the payment, and then everybody forgets about it until about a month and a half later, where the property management company then reaches out via phone and says, we didn't get payment for the last 2 months. And then that ensued an investigation and discovery of actually what happened. And at that point in time, that property management company revealed that they had been previously breached. So long story short, phishing without actually clicking on a link is still widely prevalent, and it works.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did that company then, did they change up any of their procedures for payments going outbound, and did they have now checks and double checks on top of that?
That is in process, as I understand it.
Seemed like in a situation like that, it's not necessarily the person's fault who messed it up or who blindly believed the person on the other end,
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's one of those things that it realistically could happen to anybody. And no matter how many technical controls you put in place, you need those administrative controls that are thoroughly reviewed and tested, and then roadblocks cleared, or the process restructured when you do run through those in a tabletop exercise. And you sit there and you say, wow, this isn't working. It could take 2 weeks to get this approved because of all the bureaucracy. Let's fix that.
Mm-hmm.
And, unfortunately, without those tight and tested administrative controls, I can see this happening again.
For sure.
Yeah, that's a wild story. I think one of the biggest problems and things I hear that happen, in a situation like this, is everybody is quick to blame it on the fish or however it came in, but nobody ever steps back to realize nothing was reviewed. The processes weren't reviewed. How long has it been those processes been in place? So when we go back and review it, we realize, well, that probably was one of the main issues. I think we don't review policies and procedures enough to prevent situations of this nature. But great story, very interesting.
Yeah, that reminds me, I heard this in a class one time where the instructor was saying, let's say that someone at your company does have an 8-character password and it does get cracked super easily. You could say it's that person's fault for having an 8-character password, but what technically allowed that person to make an 8-character password in the first place. That's the problem right there. You have to get down to the root of it and understand, yes, if we understand that the problem is that technical control, well, then that's something that you can fix.
Right. And in that case, there'd be the technical control that would enforce the password, the characters and the length of the password. And then there'd be the administrative control that would say that it's okay for the company to have an 8-character password. How about you, Nick? What have you run across in your past?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So when we were talking about doing this, I was trying to think of all the great stories, and I always come back to social engineering because it's my favorite of all the cybersecurity has to offer us. But when thinking about the stories and what we've been through, and recently we have engaged in different types of social engineering, but this specific story was in person, and the company engaged us to test the new RFID badges that they just had installed. I think that's what we're seeing more often nowadays is everybody's going away from the physical key and they're going to the reader. So you get within, I think, generally under 12 inches. Sometimes people just touch, you see them touch the pad and the door unlocks. So they specifically wanted to see if we could utilize this new technology and gain access to the building. So when we were doing this is specifically at a production company of a construction company. So there's a lot of people in and out, a lot of moving pieces, which generally aids in our effects, making us more effective. So what we did is we essentially reverse engineered one of these readers, and you can get cloners online. I think Hack5 makes them, if I'm not mistaken. So we took one of these and kind of reverse engineered it. So every time we walked by somebody with a badge, it was essentially taking the reading of the badge. It houses, though, that information. You go back to your office, car, whatever have you, and you start cloning badges and see which ones work. So the easiest way we found to do it was put this reader actually in a bag or a backpack. We dressed up as the UPS driver, making a delivery, carrying a bag. We walked through the lunchroom, basically just around, and nobody said anything to us because we had a clipboard and a package, right? Those are kind of the two items that you pass go, you're good, right? They see this, they don't question you. So we walked through a bunch of areas. At the end, we totaled about 12 badges that were read. So we come back the next day, and after we cloned the badges, the one we found to be the most useful was maintenance, right? Generally, maintenance has access to everything. So we used this. We did try all the badges that we got to clone, but when we used maintenance, we were able to get into basically any room we wanted. And in this case, including the crown jewels, right? We were able to get into the server room. So then we were able to use different Hack5 tools, right? The Shark Jack, and we kind of bled over into there. But the most fun, right, was getting this badge reader to actually get the badges and walk around here and collect all that data and just see that people were not, questioning us at all. So that was one of the most interesting, most recent stories, I think.
From again, I think that comes back to those, the technical control side where there's quite a few things that you could do with encrypted readers, make it harder to clone them. Although, Kyle, I think you've got some tools where you've cloned the encrypted badges before, but that's probably a different podcast. But you've got those technical controls, but then you have the scenario of the impossible travel, which we look at in the IP space, right? Is this user coming from New York and then 10 seconds later they're coming from Moscow? Probably something not quite right there. We could do the same thing as security practitioners with badge access. So if we see person 1 going into building 1 at 10 o'clock, and then at 10:01, they're going into another building across campus. Well, that's probably unlikely because of an impossible travel scenario. And I think the way in which most organizations are set up is property management controls the door, the badge access, and the door security, and information security controls the technical side of the security for the organization. And those two don't often meet or don't often have access to each other's data. But I think in just about every organization that I've worked in that was large enough to have multiple departments, there was that separation of duty between the property management side and the technical information security side. But I always thought it would be an interesting thing to go in, grab the logs from the door readers, and just comb through them and see how much impossible travel is in there and identify which badges had been cloned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, with the technical controls, the biggest issue we have is just not educating staff on actually confronting people that they might think are illegitimate, right? We don't question authority. In another instance, we actually dressed up as a fire marshal checking fire extinguishers. So again, where people just think, oh, they're important, they've got a badge, we just rigged up a badge on a little plastic thing quick. You don't get close enough, you won't notice. Similar to the story I just told, it's still a technical issue with the technical control, but it all kind of comes back to the same issue. So it's a position of authority. Generally, it's fair game.
I think they say you can get in anywhere with a clipboard.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, that's an interesting point too that you bring up about not training users or people to confront people that they think might not belong, right? I mean, working in the consulting space, we're constantly among different buildings, different work groups with different clients, things like that, right? We're constantly kind of a new face in new areas. Sometimes we have, badge access with readers that function, sometimes not so much. But the number of times that I've been able to, just tailgate somebody through a door or just look like I belong there, and, they'll hold the door open for me and say, oh, you're going this way? And you go, oh, yeah, right? And you just, put on a smile and walk through the door. Nobody really gives you a second thought, right? And similar to Eric's story where you see an email and if you think about it too long, maybe something doesn't seem quite right, or you think about, leaving the door open for somebody that you don't know 100%, there's always that, what if they're here for something bad, or what if they're doing something, or what if this isn't what they say that it is, right? When it comes to an email or tailgating someone through a door. And I just think people don't want to be uncomfortable and have that potentially awkward conversation of like, I'm interrogating somebody because I don't recognize them. They're coming into my office space, right? Like people just want to do their job and get home and do a good job in most cases. So it's just interesting that so many of these are possible just because people don't want to rock the boat, I guess, in a lot of cases.
Well, we are Midwest nice.
We are, yeah, and it's good and it's bad, right? I mean, try to tailgate someone into New York. I'm sure it's a different story than doing it in Minneapolis, but
you're spot on, Kyle, with everything you just said, and it does make it very difficult to train and educate staff because of that. I think that when we are educating staff, one thing that I think about is ask a question that is friendly, right? You ask them, hey, who are you going to see? Where are you off to? What meeting are you going to? And that's when you start to think, oh, okay, well, I've never heard of that person. Or maybe they have a long pause, right? Or they start to trip up there. So to me, it's, well, would you let somebody tailgate into your own house? Right? Obviously you wouldn't. But we go back to, obviously, if this person's got a clipboard, I'm probably going to let them through. So it is very tough to, kind of figure out what's right and when what's wrong, because you don't want to confront somebody. But yeah, great points you're bringing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to have that culture of security built in from the top down, though. You need buy-in from the upper people in order to push that down to everybody. Otherwise, if it's just from the security team, you might not get all the way across the company like you need to.
Kind of gets looped in with the phishing training, right? We
Sure.
give it all the time, but somebody's still going to click on that email or the link within the email.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of that, I mean, that kind of leads into my story that I prepped for today, but there's kind of social engineering, trusting, all of those pieces, and maybe it'll be a good segue for Jamie too, or James. It started with a penetration test that took place at the client. I mean, years before I had even started there. This group of penetration testers during the engagement ran a phishing campaign, right? So sending out emails that look legitimate to drop a piece of malware onto the client computers to try and get remote access to those systems or command and control capabilities, just kind of basic stuff. And they sent out this email that looked like it came from the Citrix organization and said, hey, your Citrix client is out of date. Install this application to update your Citrix and everything will be good to go. So they did that. In reality, it was actually what was the tool set? PowerShell Empire, which is like a kind of C2 framework for PowerShell. I think there's some Python scripts with it now. It gives you a whole slew of capabilities. I don't know if it's currently being worked on. It was for a while, but anyway, it was just basically an HTA script that would execute in the browser and then do a callback to a C2 server that lived off at the penetration testers company. So they send this out. Years later, right, I start kind of helping out at this client and looking through some of their logs, looking through some of their old stuff, looking through, alerts that are popping every so often. And there's this one called Citrix_update.hta. And it keeps going off and saying, hey, this looks like, some malicious file. This looks bad. This doesn't look good. And, having just started there, I'm like, hey, team, what's this file that's hanging out, right? Like this notifies us that it's bad. This says it's bad. Everything here says it's bad. If we upload it, it looks like it's a bad piece of malware. And they're like, oh, it's not malware. It's just a Citrix updater. We keep it around in case we need to update anybody's Citrix. And we're like, okay, cool. So, I let it slide the first time and it pops up again and it pops up again. So I said, okay, what am I going to do with this? So I grab it. Not super difficult to get into. I mean, it was basically just an HTA, which is an HTML application file, basically just base64 encoded, a little bit of kind of trickery here and there to kind of obfuscate. It wasn't necessarily encrypted, but it was obfuscated, code in there. Pull that apart, see what it's doing, kind of run it in a sandbox that I had, find the IP address that it was reaching out to, pull back those records, go to that IP address and say, okay, who owns this domain that lives there? And sure enough, it leads back to that penetration tester's domain, somebody else who's doing security work. And so I reach out to their guy over there and I say, hey, I've got a question about this file that I found on our systems, not knowing at this point that it was part of a penetration test. Just like, well, why is this thing reaching out to your servers? I'm thinking, could it be, a man in the middle, like they're trying to send it to another trusted source and then exfiltrate data? What's the purpose behind this? And he's like, oh no, that's yeah, let me pull those old reports. Here's our old reports we did for this client back, 4 or 5 years ago. And yeah, here's that file. It says it was a Citrix update and nobody had cleaned it up, right? So it's an instance where people receive this email, they receive this this thing that looks official, they believe it, and then they save it in longevity to hang on to it and say, oh yeah, no, this is an official document, right? We got the email, this is fine. Even when the penetration test completes, the report is handed out. Nobody goes through and cleans up the files. Nobody alerts the entire staff that, hey, that file you received, that's not really a Citrix update, right? So, I mean, a successful phish in the fact that, not only one was it successful and it helped them achieve their goals during the pen test, but it was also successful in that, they tricked people for years on end into thinking that this file isn't what it is. And even, faced with detections in their anti-malware, in their endpoint detection softwares, right? Even when faced with the evidence that, hey, these things say it's malicious, they were like, no, it's not malicious, right? This is a totally normal file. Somebody sent it to us. That's just a misclassification. So, when it comes from an official source or something somebody thinks is an official source and they don't want to rock the boat, right? Then even when given evidence against that, they're still going to just, claim it's the other thing. So a pretty interesting story, both on, making sure you actually clean up after your penetration tests, but also, don't always believe everything everybody tells you in an email.
So that's really similar to a social engineering situation, right? You don't question authority. You don't question what somebody told you, and it lives there as a backdoor forever.
So were those HTA files still calling out regularly?
Only when somebody tried to execute it. Now our anti-malware was stopping it from running because it recognized the source, right? That's saying, hey, this is an Empire script. And so no, they weren't calling out anymore. But I had to get the actual file out of the quarantine when it got picked up and then pull it apart to find where that IP was hard coded. So no, they weren't receiving any traffic from us, but people were trying to execute it, and then it would get caught and then sent off to the security team.
Who did not seem very concerned about it.
Yeah, until we started taking a really close look at it, and I think I had to write up a whole 5-6 page report on here is why this is not a Citrix update, right? Here's all the evidence, here's all the screenshots, go do it yourself. Here's how to pull it apart. Similar to what James you do for work, I'm sure, but I mean, just step by step, pull the thing apart from, obfuscated to plain text and show people that no, it's not what you think it is.
Pretty much. Well, one time I messed with a pen testing company who was pen testing us. It was when I was working for an electrical utility. Phishing and that phishing analysis, that was my bread and butter. I loved that. That was my favorite thing. And we start getting reports of coming in, and the email was beautifully written. It had some C-level person's, their signature, phone number, cell phone number in the signature. I mean, it was perfect. I followed the link safely, and it came to an exact copy of our login portal. I mean, it was branded and everything. It was beautiful. So I was like, oh, I mean, it was one of those times okay, I know we're a target. We were definitely being targeted. This was bad, all right? And then 20 came in, 30, and then up to maybe 75 to 80 of these all came in to different people around the company. I'm like, okay. Get all hands on deck, right? Start going through it. We're blocking any sort of traffic to that URL. We're getting a list of all the people who received it. We're deleting it from inboxes, and then a different one starts coming in from a different C-level person. It was beautiful. Again, it had all this information in it, still going to the same place, oh, this is horrible. And then one of my coworkers says, wait a minute, are we being pen tested right now? And we're like, oh, you're probably right, because this wasn't just really, really good. It was perfect. It was almost too perfect, right? So what I did was I put in a fake username and a fake pin, and just left it that. Told my boss, he's like, okay, good job, guys. So we wrote up what we did and everything, and we did that. Well, some weeks later, the pen testing company came to our company, and they did a big, all hands meeting about, hey, how did it go and everything. And they even did some physical pen testing too. And you could see on camera how they piggybacked off of someone. They, had on the appropriate looking sort of, helmet and gear and jeans and boots. And they were carrying big binders that were branded with our company stuff, and they just snuck right in behind someone. But when he was talking about the phishing email and the stats and what they were sending it out to and everything, that's when I perked up. And he said, yep, we didn't get anybody to click on it, but we did get one. not that they didn't get anybody to click on it, but as far as gathering actual usernames and PIN numbers and everything, because they were waiting for them to come in so that they could quick take that PIN and then just reuse it on the site and get back in. But he said, yeah, I know that we got found out, because somebody put in the username Jenny and the PIN number 8675309. Everybody died laughing. Nice. He's like, all right, who was it? And so I raised my hand. He's like, all right, that was hilarious. That's going on our wall of pen testing memories. And so yeah, that's. But still, when you don't know you're being pen tested and you see the perfect fish coming, it's like, this is not good. And then everybody starts getting one. It was a good test of our incident response and email deletion capabilities. It all turned out well, though. That's good.
And Jamie, you do a little bit of instruction or work with SANS too, don't you?
Well, I was in the SANS mentoring program for a while. I had, that was just like a local community class where it wasn't the full 7-day course. It was maybe 1 or 2 hours and one night a week for maybe 6 or 7 weeks. And so, yeah, I was doing that. That was a lot of fun. I have teaching in my background too. And so it was a lot of fun to do technical things, but it was during the pandemic when they closed down the mentoring program, since so much of their content is also available to streamed online or just pre-recorded. So it makes sense for them to have closed it down, but boy, was it fun when I had the opportunity.
Yeah, good for you. And I know those courses are really well received. I don't think you can go wrong with any of the SANS courses, and I know the folks that have taken them on the teams have all spoken very highly of them.
Yeah, they have a very impressive cadre of instructors working for them. They're all very, very good at what they do.
Yeah, Jamie, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate your time. I've always loved the work that you've done and the training and the chats that you've done with the teams when you've come in and done some in-person training. So thank you for that as well.
You bet. Always happy to help out. Thanks again.
Want security leadership without the headcount? As an extension of the team, IT Audit Labs will provide the experts to guide and counsel your company. We will start by creating a custom security program that caters to your industry while providing transparency and remediation to improve cyber posture while reducing risk. Contact IT Audit Labs to find out more.